Washington Journal continues.
Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma is our guest for the next segment here on Washington Journal as the House comes in this morning at 9 o'clock Eastern. Congressman Cole, we're hearing about a meeting mid-morning today of the Republican conference, apparently to talk about how to move forward on the spending on the Homeland Security Department. What's the situation on that spending measure, and what can you clue us in on possible proposals?
I can tell you a little bit. As I'm sure your audience knows right now, the only part of the spending budget that hasn't been approved through September 30th of this year is the Department of Homeland Security section, and that runs through the end of February in what's called a continuing resolution, basically status quo funding. I think what will happen is we'll present a bill again to extend the funding to September 30th, and there'll probably be an amendment made in order or placed inside the bill. I think there's still a procedural discussion about what's best there. And that amendment, which I suspect will be by Representative Mulvaney from South Carolina, will basically say that no money in this bill can be expended to execute the president's executive order that was issued in November of last year. And so that will sort of set up a showdown. It'll set up both a spending showdown. I think there's no question we have the votes to get that to the Senate. So that may actually become the main theater of battle, if you will, because Democrats will have the ability to control the filibuster in the Senate. So they may block it, they may not. If it gets to the president's desk, we'll see what he does.
So you're a member of the Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committees. This language you're talking about, likely by Mick Mulvaney of South Carolina, on the president's immigration order, is that going to pass muster? Can you finally slice this and say we cannot use this money for implementing that?
Well, it's going to be a little more difficult than people might think, because what actually funds the part of the immigration system that the president is dealing with is largely run by fees, and so it's not money that we normally appropriate.
Right.
And the Appropriations Committee doesn't have jurisdiction over all government spending. It has about a third.
So those fees are continuing to come in?
They come right in, and they can continue to operate. The second thing that I think people sometimes forget about that makes this very tricky is denying funding for inaction is difficult. Inaction is not a very expensive thing. And the president just telling people don't enforce this part of the law doesn't cost a lot of money. So we're going to have to wait and see. I think there will be some discussion. Some other ideas have been put on the table, and I think this is to acquaint the broader conference about what those might be. So there's still a chance that this could change a little bit. So what I'm telling you is what I think is going to happen, but there'll be some other things considered as well.
And you anticipate some action on this next week?
I do. I think we feel like it's very important. We said we would act once there was a Republican majority in the Senate, and we basically teed it up to work as it is. So I think it's important to us to keep the commitment that we made and move ahead.
Let's go to earlier in the week in the setup of leadership in the House, particularly the Speaker election. The watchers of the House saw something they haven't seen in a while, and that is a number of votes, 25 or so votes against the Speaker from Republicans. How did all of this develop?
Well, I think largely because people that wanted to oppose the Speaker didn't do it at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. We hold conference elections in November to decide who our nominee for Speaker is going to be. The Speaker's vote ought to be largely ceremonial. The three people that opposed him decided literally in the last 72 hours or so to do this. So they never really had a chance to succeed. Frankly, they would have done much better, probably both in terms of votes and in terms of the appreciation of their colleagues, had they simply operated by normal procedure. There's nothing wrong with opposing the Speaker for election, and we have very robust leadership elections, but there's a time and a place to do it. You don't do it on opening day, and you don't do it by running against the person that the Republican conference has already nominated. I mean, that's like tackling your own quarterback in the first play of the new game.
You were quoted earlier this week, though, on that election as saying, if you go against your own colleagues by opposing the Speaker on the floor, you will embarrass House Republicans and disrupt our team. It'd be an unforgivable political behavior. You said this before the election.
Absolutely. No, I certainly stand by that. Because, again, people know how this works. Yeah. And they had every opportunity to run. I encourage people to run. There's nothing wrong with that. But Doing it in this way on this day is just, I think, it's symbolic. It puts your own colleagues in a difficult spot. And you're not really attacking the Speaker. You're attacking the decision of the Republican conference. You're attacking your colleagues, not the person that they selected. And again, I just think it's not the way to operate.
Well, some of the obvious casualties, at least early on, reportedly were Congressman Webster of Florida and Rich Nugent and Webster of Florida in their Rules Committee assignments. What's the latest on that?
Well, the Speaker hasn't made any final decision on that. He said he was going to withhold action and talk to the members in question. But I think, and again, you have a very sophisticated viewing audience, but just to make a point, this is the Speaker's committee. Other committees are normally chosen by the conference. This is specifically the Speaker's committee. So and it's used to advance the Republican agenda in the House. And by the way, it's used that way by Democrats as well when they're in the majority. It's just the way the institution works. So to run against the Speaker when you've been personally appointed by him to his most important committee and not inform him that you're going to do it, or to vote against him, that's just, again, not done.
The Speaker has said several times to reporters anyway afterwards, we're going to have a family conversation about this. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, actually, John Boehner is a much more tolerant person to the extent. Look, he and I have disagreed on multiple occasions. I was in his leadership team at one point. We had some pretty serious disagreements. So, but there's a way to handle that. And there's certainly nothing wrong with people having different points of view. But if you're on Rules Committee, for instance, you always vote for the Republican rule, just as if the Democrats always vote for the Democratic rule or the Democratic alternative. Certainly when they're in a majority, you can dissent and disagree, but when it comes time for the vote, you accept the will of the majority and advance the legislation to the floor. Now, on the floor, you're free to do whatever you want to do. You don't vote against the rule, but on the issue, you vote however you want to vote. But to surrender control of the rule in a legislative sense is to surrender control of the floor, and it's just not done.
Lastly on this issue, we saw a side of the Speaker yesterday in his briefing with reporters about how he felt about some of the things that members who opposed him. I wanted to show you that and get your reaction to it.
During my years here when I voted, I had the 8th most conservative voting record in the Congress. And it does pain me to be described as spineless or a squish. And I tell you what pains me the most is when they describe me as the establishment. Now, I'm the most anti-establishment speaker we've ever had. You know, who was the guy who got rid of earmarks? Me. Who's the guy who believes in regular order? Me. Who believes in allowing more members to participate in the process from both sides of the aisle? Me. I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin, and I'm going to do my best to show all of our members, Democrats and Republicans, and those members who voted against me, that I'm up to the job that I was given.
What did you think when you heard the Speaker's comments?
That's the John Boehner I know and frankly admire, respect, and love. I first met him when he was a freshman. I was the executive director of the National Republican Congressional Committee, so my job was to help elect these guys. And again, most people won't know this, but he's also the guy, as a freshman, there was a notorious group of anti-establishment rebels called the Gang of Seven that resulted in shutting down the bank and the post office with all those abuse. That was John Boehner. And so he was, I suppose he looks at some of these people that are difficult for him and said, you know, I was probably pretty difficult for my own leadership back then, and he was. But he played within the rules, and he got real things done. And again, as he pointed out, he has the 8th most conservative voting record in Congress over a 20-plus year career. So the idea that he's somehow not conservative enough, most of these debates that are going on are debates over tactics. They're not debates over differences of issues. And they're debates over calculations. I mean, John Boehner's smart enough to know shutting down the government is not a very smart way to do business because it doesn't work in the end, doesn't achieve its objective. And he's also willing to recognize there's a distribution of power in this town. We still have divided government. We have a Democratic president through January 2017. The Democratic, we have the Senate now, but it's not as if the Democratic minority over there is powerless. It's got control of the filibuster process, and Democrats have the ability to sustain a presidential veto in both houses of Congress. So this is a game where, to use a football analogy from Oklahoma, you always do that, you got to think in terms of first downs. You know, you move the ball in increments. You don't throw into the end zone every play. And we have a lot of people that want to, you know, go for bust every time, and it won't work. And at the end of the day, we also have responsibility to the American people. They didn't send you up here to make life worse for them. And I think when you do things like shut down the government, don't pay federal workers who are performing important services, make it hard for people to get a visa or passport to travel, those type of things, then you're making life more difficult for the average American. We should be here trying to make them freer, more secure, and their lives a little bit better when and where we can.
Congressman Tom Cole, our guest, till about 8:20 Eastern this morning on Washington Journal, 202-748-8000. For those of you on the Democrat line, the Republican line is 202-748-8001. And for independents, 202-748-8002. Let's go to Pat in South Carolina, in Long, South Carolina. Good morning, Pat. Thanks for waiting.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for taking my call. Representative Cole, I would like to start seeing people that we elect to start using common sense in Washington. I understand that you're on the budget committee. Every department of our federal government is be submitting a budget. And when y'all look at it, the first thing you should do is cut it 10%. But they should submit you a line item budget. So we quit paying for what? Rattlesnakes, kit squirrels, and all this other garbage that our money, the money that you and I are paying every day, is being wasted. And the oversight committee is like open the barn door and let the horse out. Your committee should be the one holding these departments the money line. The other thing I'd like to discuss with you is our money that we are sending overseas to build schools, help roads, and all this stuff. These people don't even like us. And don't tell me it's 1% of GDP. I don't care if it's not the 50 cents. Spend it in America. And thank you.
All right, Pat, thank you.
Well, thanks very much for the call. A couple things. First of all, I agree with you in terms of how you ought to operate and be tough on spending. And you'd be surprised to know when the Republicans took over the House, the deficit every year was $1.4 trillion. This year, it'll be under $500 billion, probably under $400 billion next year. So the idea that no cutting or reductions going on is just simply not true. It's actually the most rapid decline in deficit. Now, still too high, but it's actually moved down dramatically. Probably be surprised to know that in what's called the discretionary budget, it's about a third of all spending. It's what most people think of as the government, the military, the National Institute of Health, those sorts of things. We're spending $165 billion a year less than when George Bush was president, less. What drives spending now is, frankly, mostly things that people like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those type of things. You put them together, that's almost 70% of the total federal budget these days. So, you know, the spending reductions have indeed occurred and honestly will probably continue to occur. So this is one where I think we've not done a very good job of patting ourselves on the back. All the groups that are getting less money are aware that they're getting less money. None of the people that are concerned about spending are aware how much we've actually cut it. And we will continue to do so. To the second point on foreign aid, I'm not going to tell you that foreign aid is 1% of the GDP because it's not. It's probably not 0.1% of the GDP. It is less than 1% of all government spending. I used to sit on the Foreign Operations Subcommittee. Again, that spending's been reduced, but I'll also tell you it's pretty important for the United States to be engaged in some of these things. You can deal with Ebola in Africa, or you can deal with it in the United States. And these are tools that help us to build relationships with us. We don't give money just to, quote, people that don't like us. We mostly give money to people that do like us. Most of the people that I know think Israel is a pretty good friend of the United States of America. The largest single recipient of American aid is Israel, and largely for security purposes. They don't need it, obviously, in terms of a very advanced country. And again, a lot of this stuff, what's called, quote, foreign aid is also the operation of every American embassy any place in the world is usually within that budget as well. Your passports, if you want to travel overseas, are funded there. So I don't think taking a small measure and using it strategically in our own interest is a bad thing. Egypt has been another historically large recipient, and that's kept peace in the Middle East since 1970. We have not a general war between Egypt and Israel. That helps keep energy prices down, gives us preferred access to the Suez. Egyptian intelligence been very cooperative with us in foiling attacks. Egypt allow us to fly thousands of flights over their airspace to support American troops when they were in Iraq and Afghanistan. So again, I think there's a sense that we just willy-nilly give money away around the world. That's just simply not the case.
Next up is Columbia, Missouri, and our Democrats line, Beverly. Beverly, make sure you mute your television. Go ahead with your comment.
My television is muted.
Okay.
Mr. Cole, I don't understand. Y'all are holding up the Defense Department, but yet you say the borders are not secure. Tell me why you're holding it up.
We're not holding up. Actually, Congress passed the both the defense authorization, that is the plan by which you spend, in November, and passed the normal budget as well as part of the overall spending omnibus bill. We've never stopped funding the military. Neither party has done that. So again, I'm not sure exactly where you're getting your information, but the Defense Department is indeed operating.
She may have meant Homeland Security, but you would address that.
Yeah, Homeland Security is a different thing. Defense Department is actually a much larger part of the budget, but Homeland Security is also being funded. It's not been funded. It's funded through the end of February. We're going to have a discussion, obviously, about whether or not the president's executive order, which we think is beyond the scope. You know, we think this is beyond normal executive discretion. He's literally taking whole sections of the law and saying this simply isn't going to apply anymore. I'm going to refuse to enforce the law. So that's our disagreement. We may end up in court over this longer term, because this may be another one sort of where the president overreached, for instance, in so-called recess appointments. You know, he said, I can appoint, you know, even when the Senate's not in recess, made that argument, made those appointments. The Senate took him to the Supreme Court. He lost 9-0. So it's not as if this president doesn't have a history of overreach, and it's not as if that he hasn't been pulled back on occasion, both by judicial activity and by resistance in Congress.
Well, given the big omnibus in December and the delayed funding of Homeland Security, or the suspended funding, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, how likely is it, do you think, that in 2016, for the fiscal year 2016 budget, for the next upcoming budget, that the House at least will be able to pass its appropriations bill on time and get them to, and the Senate as well?
Well, I think there's a much better chance than there's been. If you remember, last year, actually, the House was passing appropriations bills, mostly bipartisan, and actually passed 7 of them. There's 12 normally. It approved 11 in full committee. Could have kept doing that, but the Senate didn't pass a single bill. So at some point, your leadership says, why should we keep passing bills? We're wasting floor time. The Senate's not going to take up any appropriations bill. Now that you have a Republican Senate, and you have a Mitch McConnell person that is committed to regular order, a member of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, a believer in moving these bills, I think we have a much better chance of doing that, and I hope we do. But, you know, Congress hasn't done normal the House since 2006. The last time, and it was under Republican control, I'll point out, Democrats never moved 12 appropriations bills across the floor when they were in control.
Here's Onstead, Michigan. Chris, good morning, on the independent line.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. Congressman Cole, I've got a couple different comments. One, excuse me, I respectfully disagree that this is you make the analogy of a football game. I don't believe it is a football game. All congressmen and senators are elected to office, and so is the president. And I believe that you have to take and look at what is in the best interest of our country. And regarding immigration bill, why all of, the comment is made, well, we got to win, we don't want to lose. And no, it's not a football game. We have to take and negotiate, send it back to committee, negotiate with the Democrats, Republicans, Independents, come out of committee, vote on it, and then send it to the president. What's good for our country? That's what needs what we need to have. Again, this is not a football game.
Well, I appreciate that, and forgive me for my regional lapse into using analogy, but I agree with the basic point that you're making, frankly. And I've tried to always do that in my time in Congress. I don't believe in shutdowns. I do believe in compromises. I think if you looked at my record or talked to my colleagues on either side of the aisle, you'd see that I try to do exactly the things you suggest. And I would say this, even when there are disagreements up here, look, I don't doubt anybody cares that's in the Congress of the United States, Democrat or Republican, cares about the country. I don't have any doubt. I know these men and women, and even some that I disagree with very strongly are patriots. They want what's best for America. They disagree about what that is. We're a pretty amazing country. You know, we're 315 million pretty independent folks spread across a vast continent, living in different circumstances. I'm not surprised we have disagreements, but a lot of these discussions and disagreements are exactly what the founders intended, that there would be debate, discussion, that we would have disagreement, that mostly it would be difficult to get things done in government. Madison actually thought that would be the best defense of freedom, was competing interests, checking one another and allowing individuals to go about their business. And you know, I think sometimes if he could come back today and watch us, he'd say, boy, this thing is working exactly the way I planned it, because they're not getting much done, and the American people are going about their business and running the country pretty well. So again, but I take your point well, and if I inadvertently sounded like I trivialized what we do, I didn't mean to do that. I'm just using an analogy that to me is pretty comfortable and pretty traditional.
You mentioned in the founders, the House beginning the day, reading the U.S. Constitution. Will you be part of that effort?
You know, if my schedule permits, I will, and I always make a point of listening to it. You know, this will actually only be the third time in the history of the United States that the Constitution is read in the House of Representatives. Now, we all assume that everybody's read it, and frankly, I'm sure every member that's serving probably has. But I think it's really important, and it's something that the Republicans started, and I hope Democrats, when they take over, will continue, that we reflect on what unites us. And you know, when we take our oath, we don't take an oath to the country, we take an oath to defend the Constitution. This is a really remarkable place. It's founded, you know, on ideas and values, and that's what our Constitution and what our Declaration of Independence both represent. So I think it's the appropriate and fitting thing to do, and I'm proud that we're doing it, and hope our Democratic friends do it, and maybe even with the Republican Senate, they'll start thinking about doing it over there.
Here's to back to calls. Let's go to Tampa and our Democrats line. Alan, hello. Tampa, Florida. Good morning.
Oh,
Hey, good morning.
good morning. Mr. Cole, you seem to me to be a pretty reasonable guy from what I've seen on TV when I've seen you interviewed on these various stations. That said, what are your plans for fixing this Looney Tunes tax system we have, specifically the income tax?
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that was his
okay,
question.
That's question.
Yeah.
I don't sit on the committee that actually deals with the tax system, the Ways and Means Committee, but I'd certainly give you my thoughts and where I think that committee is going to go. Look, you're 100% right when you imply that our tax system is complex, irrational, and extraordinarily difficult for the average American to understand. Generally speaking, I would like to eliminate deductions and lower rates, make it flatter and fairer, and let investment flow where it is most productive in terms of producing growth and jobs, as opposed to tax havens that simply protect wealth but don't necessarily put it to work. I know that's exactly what Paul Ryan wants to do. Now, it's pretty easy to describe in general principles. It's pretty hard to do. And anytime you touch the tax code, there are winners and losers. Somebody is going to end up paying more, even though the rate comes down. Others will say, well, thank goodness they've gotten rid of that and I'm not having to pay a greater burden. So there's a lot of juggling going on. But I think a flatter, fairer system, and one that contributes to economic growth instead of hinders it, is where we want to go. I think we actually outlined a pretty good start at that with Dave Camp, who was the chairman of Ways and Means last year. He put out an entire plan. You can look it up. That'll probably be the base bill where Paul Ryan starts.
Right.
He'll change it in some ways, but it'll also have to go through the Senate, and obviously anything we do would require a presidential signature. So there's going to be pretty fertile ground for disagreement in this area.
Would that be changing the tax system be high on the priority list for the 114th?
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Because I think it also lets you do some other things. You know, if a better tax system usually means faster economic growth. Faster economic growth generates actually more tax revenue, even though individuals are paying less for the government. And that lets you then do some things like fix the roads, do infrastructure. So I think you may see this as a way of dealing with some bigger problems. And again, there's nothing like, we saw this in the 1990s, the differences between the parties got a lot less when the economy was growing faster and there was enough government income to both lower the deficit and do a lot of pretty important things for the country.
You mentioned the roads. a lot of people talking about the drop in the gas price to add a gas tax for infrastructure. Would you support,
well,
support or oppose
they haven't talked to
that?
anybody in my district. Most of my constituents would say, don't take away the benefit of lower prices. I do think, though, you're going to have to find a way to get some more revenue into the transportation system. I'm not convinced. Actually, I think a gas tax is probably not the way to go. But because what's happening right now, if people just reflect on their own experience, that tax hasn't changed in 20 years, but automobiles and transportation have changed dramatically.
Yeah.
So your cars are more efficient, still the same amount of tonnage over the road, so to speak, but you're probably getting about double the gas mileage you were getting 20 years ago. Plus, we have a whole new fleets of vehicles coming on, electric cars, compressed natural gas, that don't pay any gas tax at all, but they're still using the road. So we're going to have to redesign the revenue system. And we may have to do something. You could actually maybe eliminate the gas tax, which now only covers part of the vehicles and a shrinking number that are using it, and go to a more baseline tax. My colleague from Oklahoma, Mark Wayne Mullen, has done some interesting work on this in trying to, let's just go back to a very low energy tax that covered all energy and dedicate that to the transportation fund, eliminating some of these things that no longer make a lot of sense, because again, we're devising new ways to drive cars, and we're making the vehicle itself ever more efficient.
Here is Stanley, New York, and Linda on our Republican line.
Good morning, Mr. Cole.
Morning.
I'm just wondering about some of this Obamacare stuff. Now, what are Americans going to do when they can't get a job or they lose a job because of this illegal immigration? Now, these people, we're told, are not going to be covered under Obamacare, so aren't companies going to be hiring them so they don't have to pay fines?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, in terms of Obamacare, you actually saw the House acting yesterday, trying to restore the 40-hour standard as the normal work week, so that workers that were part-time workers weren't covered by Obamacare, which has a 30-hour standard. What we've seen is a lot of companies have then lowered the number of hours those people work into the 20s, so they don't have to pick up the extra expense. The House passed that. I think the Senate may well pass it. The president's threatened to veto it, but in all the discussion over Obamacare and all the multiple votes we've had, people forget 8 things have actually become law where the two sides agreed that have lowered the overall cost of the system by over $60 billion. Businesses were going to have to file 1099s on essentially every transaction, costing them billions. Democrats looked at that with Republicans, and we got rid of it. There was an extended living clause. It simply wasn't appropriately funded. We moved legislation to get rid of it when Secretary Sebelius was Secretary of Health and Human Services. You know, the Republicans are right here, urged the president to sign, and he did. So this is an area that I think you're going to continue to see us work, but people that are opposed to it, and which I'm certainly one of, and have voted for repeal, voted against the original enactment. But you need to remember, the President of the United States is still the President of the United States. You're not likely to get a full repeal of Obamacare while a guy named Obama is President of the United States. In terms of illegal workers, look, the law, in terms of if you're not here in this country legally, those laws are still in effect. And if employers are knowingly hiring people that are here illegally, they're subject and should be subject to prosecution. A lot of people look the other way, and that's one of the things that we are concerned about with the president's executive action. And what he did basically was legalize people that heretofore have been here illegally. Now, he can only do that if he can do it at all, and we don't think he can, to the end of his presidency. What you need is a larger immigration fix, if you will, in law, and I think you'll see some other areas of immigration law move. I suspect before the year is out, the president will have on his desk a very strong enforcement bill. But he'll probably get a couple things he likes, too, that we agree with him on. High-tech visas for very skilled workers coming in.
Right.
Probably seasonal labor. We have some cases where farmers end up leaving up to 40% of their crops in the field because they don't have the labor to get them picked. So again, I think there's an appropriate balance here, and we think if we move piece by piece, we can actually find some consensus on the issue between Republicans, Democrats, and obviously things that the president would be comfortable in signing.
Back to health care for a quick second. Headline in the New Jersey Star-Ledger says premiums in New Jersey spike after passage of Obamacare. What's been the experience in Oklahoma in terms of premiums and access to health care since Obamacare?
The same in terms of the spiking of costs. Look, when you're bringing a huge portion of the population into the healthcare system that was getting health care but not getting full insurance coverage, then the people that are in it that are paying usually end up paying more. I mean, it's a transference, and so I think you're going to see, and Chuck Schumer made this point indirectly recently. He said, 80 or 85% of the American people were actually satisfied with their health care. And maybe we walked down the wrong road. We should have been focused on jobs, the economy, and growth, and then we could deal with this a little bit easier. I actually think that's a fairly astute critique from a person who voted for Obamacare. So I think you're going to see, look, the inevitable result of this are going to be higher rates for people that pay it, and for businesses that have been traditionally insuring their population anyway, they're going to end up paying more.
Newark, New Jersey is next. James on the independent line.
Yes. How you doing, C-SPAN? How you doing?
Doing fine.
Hey, good to see you. Well, good to hear you.
Yes. I'm an independent now. You'll get to know the reason why to begin very soon. Now, me and Paul Ryan have been working together with taxes since 2011. Now, I'm one that proposed 20% tax instead of 17% tax, which he's had in 2010. And he ran with the number 20% tax. That was my numbers I gave him. Of course, I didn't get nothing for it except for a thank you, maybe. But like what happened is that Wall Street pays 0 to 12% tax. Now, if everybody pays 20% tax, we can make this country run. If not, it's just a game. I'd like to get your viewpoint on this.
Well, philosophically, we're probably pretty close together. I would prefer, again, a lower number and an equal tax across the board. You're correct when you say we provide different tax rates for different things. Income is income if it's being used for personal use. So in the past, we've argued to encourage investment. We have lower capital gains tax when you sell a stock than when you get a salary, for instance. So the idea of trying to equalize the tax system and lower it is, I think, an extremely important one. So, I'm apt to be, we'll wait and see what Mr. Ryan actually proposes. He's a very good friend of mine. I sat on the budget committee that he chaired for 4 years and still do, and he's gone on to Ways and Means. But I think extremely highly of him. And I suspect that when he has a tax proposal he's willing to unveil, I'll probably be pretty enthusiastic about it.
One more quick call for you. Kansas City is next. Lisa, welcome.
Yes. My question is this. President Obama is giving away all these freebies to everyone. John Kennedy said, don't ask what your country can give you, but ask what you can give to your country. And my question is why aren't we looking at older people as resources of this country, good resources to get jobs? We tend to look at the young people, the middle-aged people, but we never look at people who are in their 60s or even in their 50s. And I was just wondering, why don't we look at them as resources, and if they have degrees, use those degrees?
Well, I think you're right, and since I'm in my 60s, I obviously agree with you very much. I think the work life has been expanding inside this country. We worry about the work week, and we worry about that, but the reality is people live longer, and more people want to work for a variety of reasons, and many people have to work for a variety of reasons. So I think your point's well made. Now, we actually have a variety of programs to both retrain people, help people. There's senior executive corps where people can make their expertise available. So I think society is pushing us actually in the direction that you're saying. I will say this, however, as somebody who has a 30-year-old son, that generation is actually contributing more to older people than any previous generation because their Social Security tax is higher, their Medicare tax is higher than any previous generation. And the most affluent people in America, statistically, are actually people that are over 60 years old. They've accumulated more wealth. They have much more in the way of government benefits, Social Security and Medicare. And now they'll say, well, I worked over a lifetime, and that's absolutely true. Although, again, people that are young, considerably younger, are paying more today because folks are living a lot longer. So there is a generational imbalance in wealth. Poverty is lower among people 65 and older than it is among children under 18. 10% versus about 22 or 23%. So this discussion of how we distribute resources is one that's going to stay with us for a long time.
Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma, beginning your 7th term on Capitol Hill. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Bill.
We heard about the Republicans and their plans for the 114th Congress. Up next, a look at what's ahead for Democrats, in particular the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives. We're going to hear from Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison of Minnesota joining us here on Washington.